When I first started recording drums at home, they sounded like this. But now my home recorded drums turn out sounding like this. And this. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are watching this because your home recorded drums sound a lot more like the first example. And that's why my next few videos are gonna be all about improving the sound of your acoustic drum recordings. Now, although these next few videos are gonna up your game, I know you guys are gonna want more, and I have even more value to provide you with. And that's why you're gonna wanna register for my free mix training that's gonna take an even deeper dive into this stuff. And you'll even receive a copy of my home studio mix guide just for registering in the description. All right, let's take a closer look at these drums. All right, so my next few videos are gonna go more into mixing and the tracks, but those tips would be useless without the basics. And before I learned these tips, it was impossible to up the sound of my home recorded drums. Let's talk about microphone placement really quick. So when I first started recording drums, I did what everybody told me to do. My overhead mics looked something like this. I made sure that the snare was centered in between my stereo pair overheads, and they would be just kind of over the middle of the kit. This is what everybody does, and if you watch pros, a lot of them mic the kit up like this. And what everybody said was that the overheads were supposed to be the overall picture of the drum kit. The only problem was that my overheads turned out sounding like this. Listen to that garbage kick and snare sound. It sounds awful. Now, why does it sound awful? It's because when we're recording at home, we're working in a lot of times cramped, small rooms that don't sound great. We might not have the best microphones. We might not be miking up the best kit. Now, it took me a long time to discover that a lot of people are having this issue, and I had to do something about it, so I changed my technique up a little bit. What I do now is basically treat my overheads as cymbal mics. So I mic them a lot closer to the crash cymbals now, but I go one step further. I actually point the microphones outwards, away from the rest of the kit. So we want to eliminate picking up the snare and the kick and the rest of the drums. We really want to focus the cymbals in here. And now my overheads sound more like this. Now, I don't worry about having the snare centered really with this technique because in the mix, these are going to become cymbal mics, and the snare isn't going to be very present at all in these microphones. And in the mix, we're actually going to eliminate even more of the rest of the kit, but we'll get to that in a later video. My next piece of advice is about the overhead microphone choice. So when I got money to finally upgrade my drum microphones, I went out and I bought a pair of C414s, very nice microphones, and I use them for overheads. Well, it took me years to realize that these large diaphragm condenser mics that I spent all this money on were just picking up way too much of the crappy room I was recording in. After I realized this, I actually went out and bought some less expensive but still good microphones, but I bought some small diaphragm condensers. And again, for my use where I'm trying to really just focus on the cymbals, these work even better. Now, one more piece of recording advice. What's the problem with the snare microphone? We all know the problem, right? A lot of bleed in this mic. Everything gets picked up, but especially the hi-hat. Now, there's always going to be bleed in this microphone. That's just the way it is. And bleed can be a good thing. But to minimize this bleed, get that hi-hat up as high as the drummer can stand it and out of the way so that this hi-hat is not annoyingly loud in your snare microphone. Now you might say, well, what about adding a gate? You could always add a noise gate at the end, but I hate doing that because when you add a gate, you get that hi-hat every time the snare opens the gate up. So if that bleed is just super loud, this is going to be even more annoying when that gate opens. So just try and minimize that hi-hat bleed as much as you can. My next tip is to not compress as much as everybody is telling you to do. Everybody's telling you to add a ton of compression to add more punch. But if we look at these drums, we can see there's really no compressors on the close mics. We have a little bit on the toms, but on the snare and the kick, we really don't have any compressors. Now, this isn't to say that I don't compress my drums at all, because I do if they need it. But in a lot of cases, if I can leave them natural, I do. Now, let me show you the problem with adding a ton of compression. Now, here we have that snare, and it's got some bleed, but it's definitely manageable. Turn it up for you. Now listen to what happens to that hi-hat bleed when we add our compressor. So exaggerated. Here's off again. And on. If you have a drummer that doesn't have good dynamics and you need to control that, yeah, you're gonna need to compress. But if you're just trying to smash these close mics to get more punch, I really think that's the wrong thing to do. And it's probably the wrong tool to use for the job. I use a transient designer, and if I want more punch, I'll reach for that instead of a compressor. I have one more tip for you today. And again, in the following videos, we're going to go a little bit more in detail into the individual tracks. This last tip is to not put any reverb on your close mics. So if we listen to the kick in here, we have some bleed there again in our snare top, ton of bleed. If we start adding a bunch of reverb to these close mics, the reverb is going to be on all that bleed as well. So I do have a reverb bus set up for the drums, but we would never want to add it to something like the snare top mic. This is just going to muddy up your drum mix. What you want to do is only send things like your samples to this reverb. And if you are layering in samples like I do a lot and sending these samples to a little extra reverb, I don't recommend having this reverb up very high in the mix. This additional reverb should really just be used to add a little bit of extra length and maybe some ambience to your snare sound and maybe your kick sound. If you find yourself adding a ton of extra reverb to your close mics, like your kick and your snare, just to make them sound better, then there's probably something you did wrong in the tracking stage. And I would go back there to find the solution. But trust me, smothering your live mics with reverb is just not a solution, and it's gonna hurt you more than help you. Guys, if you learned something here or this video helped you out, make sure and give this video a like, but come back for the following videos where I'll be going even more in depth into the tracks so that you can improve the sound of your home recorded drums. Happy mixing, guys, and I'll see you next time. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure and go grab a copy of my home studio mix guide with your go-to EQ and compression settings for all your tracks. And also go ahead and register for my online mix training that I hold a couple times a week so that you can learn how to turn your home recorded tracks into a professional product.